This episode of the Better 2 podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and M.Needom, author of My Days with the Dark Muse, as well as Love is Worth Waiting For. Hi gang, Donna here. Thanks for tuning into the Better 2 podcast. Today's guest is Connard Hogan. Connard talks about how he was in engineering school and, well, he was having a little bit of a time with it. He had this lifelong dream of wanting to be an astronaut. And as his college days progressed, he started to realize that that dream was not going to be possible. So he decided to drop out of school. And, well, it was 1968 and the height of the Vietnam War, which meant the draft was in play. So stay tuned and listen to his story. It's interesting. Hi, Connard. How are you doing?
Hi, Donna. I'm doing good, thank you. I'm nervous. I'm as nervous as a squirrel caught on a freeway during the traffic jam.
Why? Are you not used to doing these things?
Well, no, not particularly. I've had speaking experience with speaking in public before and running therapy groups, but it's a general underlying performance anxiety thing.
Well, and it's talking about yourself, so that ups
Sure.
the ante on the promote. I understand,
Sure.
but I promise I'll be gentle.
Well,
most
people.
most people will say that they've had a lot of fun on my show, so just relax, take a deep breath, and strap in for the ride. So let's go to your Better 2 moment, which is you were in undergraduate engineering school. I take it that was a passion of yours.
Yes, and I can get more into detail of how much it was.
Okay. So then why did you decide, for all the reasons in the world, why did you decide, hey, I'm going to drop out and go join the military?
That's the big question.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I think it was a culmination of a number of things. It wasn't one particular event that occurred in one day or even 1 week. When I was in high school, I didn't have to study much, so I didn't have the greatest habits, but I still got pretty good grades. I almost made the National Honor Roll. I think I had an average of about 3.0 or something. So I just barely missed it because of my last year. I slacked off a little bit even then. And so when I went into engineering school, I wasn't really prepared to do a lot of studying. And I was staying up late on a Friday or Saturday night and drinking with Buddy, a friend of mine, and carousing on the weekend, and really wasn't applying myself. So and we were warned as students when we first started in the engineering school, they had, I don't know how many, 300-400 students in the freshman class. They gave us a warning, said, many of you will be gone by such and such time, and only so many of you will graduate. Okay, so everybody's got the warning, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do it. Well, within three quarters, we were on the quarter system as opposed to the semester system, so there's 4 quarters a year. Within about 3 quarters, I was on the dean's list for probation. Wasn't on the dean's list as an honor. As an honor, I was already flagged as, hey, dude, you're in trouble.
And I want to pause right there, because as soon as you said you got that warning about, not everybody's going to graduate, all I could think of, did you ever watch Quincy? The TV show Quincy?
Yes.
And how they all start in the autopsy room and they all drop. Finally, at the end, he walks off with his cup of coffee. That came to mind because it's like you're setting people up for failure right off the bat. Well, you most likely won't be here. Yeah. So anyway, go ahead.
So the pressure started to build. I'm on the probationary list. And I thought, oh, okay, I need to do better, but I didn't really change my behavior all that much. I said, well, I just have to study as best I can. So I did, and the grades just didn't really improve for the next quarter. There were 2 other things that kind of go into this whole equation, and I guess I should explain those, that really kind of three pillars of this stool that led to this decision. One other important piece of this was I had wanted to become an astronaut, and I had buckled down during high school with my electives, and I took as many electives as I could in math, science. I did two years of drafting, industrial or business or drawing. And I was lucky enough that we had a teacher who was, I think he was Czechoslovakian, but he had escaped from the Iron Curtain, from behind the Iron Curtain through Germany, specifically Berlin, coming from East Berlin to West Berlin, and migrated to the States. And he understood not only English, of course, but he spoke German and Russian. And when I found out about that in school, I thought to myself, if I'm going to become an astronaut, it's probably good that I learn German or Russian. Germans were big in rocketry, in developing. They were big on science right before World War II. So they really were advanced technically as far as the weapon systems and so forth, including rocketry. So there was a big competition between the Soviet Union and the United States to get their scientists at the end for what led to the space race. So the space race was going on in the 50s and 60s as I grew up. It started building late 50s, about 58. So one of the things, I started doing things then, well, let me backtrack. In high school, I decided I'd study Russian. So I took 2 years of Russian. So I was really preparing myself like this is the best education I can get to go into engineering school, but also to kind of prepare to become an astronaut. When I went to college, when I went to engineering school, I also signed up for ROTC on campus at the university. Okay. I wanted to become a pilot because I knew the pilots were the ones getting chosen for the astronaut corps at that time. So I joined almost immediately the ROTC, and I think it was within the first year, toward the end of it, might have been the beginning of the second year, they had us do a psych test of some sort. I can't tell you what it was now. I don't remember the name of it. Anyway, when I got to, I noticed during the test that a lot of the questions were repetitive, although they were slightly changed. And I started getting into the analysis. Well, this question is like that one, and how did I answer that one? And none. So I didn't finish the test, and they came back with the results and said, "Well, you didn't get an okay score." So basically, they were saying I flunked it. So then they said, "Well, you're welcome to stay in ROTC and take the test again next year." And I thought, I don't think I want to do that. And that my risk analysis of that was, if I didn't do it the first time, it wasn't worth it. Along about the same time, about my beginning of my second year, I remember being in a chemistry class. The instructor was on the blackboard at the front of the class. It was an auditorium style, and I was basically in the back row, about 30 yards, about 50, 60 feet or more from the blackboard. And suddenly one day, everything looked fuzzy. I couldn't see it. And I was sitting next to a friend of mine. And I said, "What is that word? I can't read that." So I started looking off of his notes. And within a couple of days, I realized I couldn't see the distance very well. And I couldn't really take notes. And so I talked with my mother about it. She took me to an optometrist or a obstetrician. No, an obstetrician.
No, an obstetrician.
No.
Optometrist is correct.
Wrong.
Ophthalmologist.
Wrong part of the body.
Yeah, I think you're past the obstetrics at this point. You're a little bit fat, but whatever. That's a Freudian slip. Yeah.
Yes, frailed at the end of it, of course. It was determined that I had developed myopia, which is nearsightedness and required glasses. So I got some glasses. I was able to see the blackboard at that time, and that corrected that problem. But At the time, I also knew that pilots in the Air Force did not wear glasses, nor did astronauts. I don't know that contact lenses were very big at the time. They were probably pretty new. And even at that, I figured that even if, now looking back, even if I could have had contact lenses, I don't think that would have been appropriate to be a pilot, because one can slip, could fall out or whatever, right, and then you're toast. So that was another mark against me of that 3 legs. And so the one, my eyesight deteriorated. 2, I got the bad score in the ROTC, that leg deteriorated. So about the 3rd semester, quarter, would have been about the 4th or 5th. I had been a quarter. So it had been my 2nd quarter of semester, sophomore year. I was still on the dean's list for probationary list. And at that time, the Vietnam War was raging. This was in early 1968, right around the time the Tet Offensive occurred. And so that was all in the news, and every week it was like, how many dead this week, body count, VC, Americans. And that's all there was on there, and everybody knew, and protests were going on all over the place. Some people were leaving the country to avoid the draft, some people burning their draft cards, so on and so on. And so I knew that if I lost my college, I wouldn't say deferment, I think that's what it was called, college deferment, I'd be subject to the draft. But at this point, I weighed things out. I considered I didn't have the wherewithal to really think about getting a tutor, nor did my family. I wasn't working at the time, or I have the money to pay for a tutor, and it didn't really get that far in my mind to try to get a tutor. I made a decision I was going to drop out because I was not going to flunk out. It just wasn't in my nature to admit that kind of defeat or face that. So instead, I was willing to face the possibility of a draft. When I did drop out and I went to the dean to tell him, or when I made that decision, I went to the dean and told him, and he said, "Don't you know you're going to end up in the Army and go to Vietnam?" I said, "I don't care. I've made my decision." And I was pretty strong about it at the time. I didn't know quite what to do. I didn't have any further plans. It was like this big dream that I'd been working toward for, 6 years, and from latter elementary school through high school and the beginning of college, just kind of fell apart. I didn't have a hysterical breakdown. I think it was more like I was in shock or denial and had depression more than anything else. It's like, here's a dream I've had and it's gone, and I don't know what I'm going to do. So once I dropped out, I didn't really plan on, or hadn't planned on, trying to enroll in another college to keep my college deferment.
Well, and let me say this. So you're talking about dealing with depression. I mean, I hate to say it, but going to war seems like the perfect way to kill depression. I mean, I hate to say it, because you're taking most depressed people have that thought of, well, if it ends tomorrow, I really don't care. Right. So by joining the military in a war zone, I can kind of see the thinking without consciously thinking.
Right. I wasn't really clear all of what my motivation was to drop out. I knew I didn't want to flunk, and I knew that I probably couldn't continue being on the probation list for very, very many more quarters. I didn't frankly ask. That was another thing. I just said, okay, 3 times, and the hammer is coming toward me, and I don't know when it's going to strike, but I better make it. And so I decided to make my decision. So once I had actually dropped out, I learned they had a tech school in one of the buildings on the campus there at the engineering college. So I decided to enroll in that. And so I was in that for 1 or 2 quarters. And the tech school was basically more like a vocational school. And most of the other guys who were there were in the Navy. A lot of them were submariners on nuclear submarines, and they were trying to advance their careers by learning about things like electrical circuitry and whatnot, so they could be promoted and so on. But I realized at that time I was just marking time. I felt like I was in classes that were below me, that I had already been exposed to that information or knowledge, either in high school or in my previous engineering classes. So I basically just saw myself as marking time, waiting for the hammer to drop. And within about 9 months, I'd say, might have been a little bit shorter or longer, I did get the notice from the draft board to report. So rather than, I felt myself too patriotic to leave the country, to go to Canada. I didn't have a medical condition or problem that I believed would get me a medical deferment, but I didn't try really hard either. I had an ingrown toenail, and I thought, well, maybe that'll get me out of it. But when I reported and got the physical, the doctor looked at it and said, oh, they'll take care of that in basic training. Okay, you're in. So I was drafted at that point. It was like, okay, the die has been cast. Too late. So this whole time, as my grades had deteriorated and my eyesight had gone, my ROTC psych test didn't turn out very well, and I made the decision to drop out, and I was kind of marking time. I didn't know what I was going to do. I still had no clue what I wanted to do when I grew up, quote unquote, or after the military. I was just kind of going with the wind at that point. And of course, I felt like after I was inducted into the Army, I was just going to have to go with the wind. I felt like I had lost a lot of control, which I think is probably realistic back in that time when you were drafted and it was a combat. I mean, there was a war, a combat zone in Vietnam in process. So there's a lot of unknowns, of course. 3 days when you first, at that time, and I suspect it's true now, I don't know, at that time when we were inducted and taken the oath, we had been given the oath, we were sent to our where we were going to have basic training and put into an induction center situation where we basically started getting oriented. We'd have a haircut and they'd start to give us some shots, and we started learning the terminology and how, you got to stand in line heel to toe and don't talk. Here's how to make your bunk, make it every day, and put your uniform on. This is how you wear it, and so on. And within 3 days, they called us out for formation, and they said, we're going to march you over to give blood. So they didn't ask whether you wanted to give blood. They said,
you were just doing it.
You're going to give blood.
Yeah.
I thought, oh crap, I don't want to give blood. It's not that I couldn't have, they didn't ask me.
Right.
Anyway, they marched us between some barracks. We went not very far, maybe 50 to 100 yards, and they stopped us in formation, and they had a couple of military guys there and gave us a pep talk. And he said, well, we need to determine what kind of military occupational status you're going to have, which means what kind of job are you going to be doing in the Army? Not everybody is doing the same thing. And so you have an opportunity, and they called us out. They said, who here has had a felony? Who here has been in jail? Who here's it? And they put them aside, and they said, okay, they're going to go off and give blood. And then the rest of you guys have an opportunity to go take this test. Now, I think all of us were probably draftees at that point, which meant 2 years of service. It was involuntary. You have an opportunity to take this test. And if you enlist for 3 years instead of being a draftee for 2 years, we can guarantee you whatever you would qualify for as your MOS, your military occupational status. I thought, and then he said, here's the kicker. I guarantee you that if you don't take the test, the rest of you are going to go to Nam in the infantry.
Oh.
And I thought, that's a death sentence, and I am not going to Vietnam in the infantry. I just could not see myself doing that, or even I couldn't not only not surviving it, I couldn't see myself doing it. I didn't want to wallow around in the mud or whatever. And I didn't want to be firing a weapon at somebody and having them fire a weapon at me just for the principle of killing. So I took the test and I qualified to become an intelligence analyst. And I thought, sign me up. I'll do the extra year. And that's the safest place I can be. Yeah. And as it turned out, because I knew if you're in intelligence, you're probably around some of the higher ranking officers, maybe a colonel, maybe a general, majors. And turned out I was correct when I finished my advanced individual training to be an intelligence analyst and got my 30-day leave and the orders to report to Vietnam. I ended up, after I went there, being assigned to 2 Corps headquarters, which was the Army headquarters in Nha Trang, which was right on the beach. And I couldn't have been any happier than all my life, or relieved is probably the word, to be there. And the first 6 months when I was there, we were able to leave our compound. Well, actually, my where I was billeted, my quarter was right in the same compound. It wasn't that big, few acres of the headquarters building itself. So I had a 5-second commute across the gravel parking lot to my office from where I slept.
Not bad.
We could we could leave the compound if we wanted when we weren't working. We'd go off at night into Nha Trang to go to the bars and visit the young women. We could go out to the beach and swim. Mm-hmm. I thought, hey, it was well worth the decision to enlist at that point. So all along the way, I'm making the decisions. I have not been able to, and I'm kind of learning that even if I had wanted to, I couldn't have planned all these things in advance, because these are things that I wouldn't have had information or knowledge about prior to be able to make an informed decision. It's kind of like taking the step, walking a path one step at a time. Mm-hmm. And so I survived it, as you can see.
Okay, but that's important. I mean, because, there's so many things about Vietnam that you hear about. And I mean, okay, I was born in 1967. Uh-huh. So my dad, he never was drafted because he was a fireman. He was a fireman for the New Orleans Fire Department. So he never went. I don't know. I think my uncle was a school teacher, so he didn't go. Mm-hmm. So I don't know anybody in my immediate family that actually went. I remember seeing vets that were injured. I remember dancing when I was older, when my grandma or my aunt would take me to the VA, to the American Legion Hall, and I would dance with these guys. Mm-hmm. As far as, everybody's like, well, Reservoir Dogs. No, I watched Platoon, and I remember watching Platoon and crying. Mm-hmm. Because you're fortunate that you didn't have to actually go into the front line, because I can't imagine. I talked to a Navy SEAL on the program not too long ago, and I can't imagine the trauma that you go through with knowing you have to take somebody's life. Mm-hmm.
Very difficult to face.
And it's not only difficult to face, that's something that you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life.
Right. I think it's kind of a sidetrack, but one of the psychological tricks that the military uses, and I think the individual servicemen use, they begin to dehumanize the other person. So it's not like I'm killing somebody. I'm killing a gook. I'm killing a worm or whatever. And to call it the trauma or the stress by other things. I remember one. I can't remember the name of the title of the movie now, but they were in the movie. These characters were saying that don't mean a thing. It's like somebody died. That don't mean a thing. Yeah, minimizing it, so that you can survive it. But that doesn't mean the trauma isn't there, and that doesn't mean you don't carry the trauma with you when you come back stateside. And a lot of, particularly during the Vietnam War, a lot of servicemen coming back didn't feel the welcome, didn't get the welcome, didn't feel supported. And that, I think, not only didn't help them start to heal from the trauma, it added to the trauma.
They would discard it. And I mean, I want to go back to Platoon for a second. Exactly what you said about the name calling and everything. When they go into this in the movie, when they go in there and one guy just goes off the rails with killing people and his other partner is just like, you need to stop. And so it becomes so bad that he ends up killing the guy who's like, you need to stop, because he is just that out of control. And, when you look at why are we, I go back to Vietnam and like I said, I don't know a lot about it, but these are the things as a child you remember hearing. I remember hearing, I don't know how many times, well, we shouldn't have been in Vietnam. It was a police action. We should not have been there because it was a police action. So I think these are the things that diminished the vets that actually came back. And the thing is, whether you support the war or not, which I don't support war, but whether you support it or not, the people that actually sign up and go there, and in the case of Vietnam and World War II and World War I, there was a draft. In those cases, those people put their life on the line without even being forced to put their life on the line. So whether you support it or not, you need to have compassion for what these people have gone through.
Or if they chose not to show up, to leave the country or to try to find some kind of deferment or whatever reason not to do it, they might have been, how should I say, disrespected or criticized later by others in the population, like, you're a coward. Or, you deserted, or you're not a patriot or whatever. So there was a lot of pressure to show up for the draft in that situation. Although my father had been in World War II and he was considerably traumatized, I think, because he was in the Navy in the Pacific Theater and he told me just a little snippets that I learned of his experiences, that he drove a landing craft. So he would take the Marines from the ship to the beach. And he told me about that one time. He mentioned an island, Peleliu. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. And he said, I saw things that no one should ever have to see. And I believed him. So, but regardless, he was honorably discharged and had served in World War II. And so I felt like I was not compelled. I owed it to the country to serve. So I didn't have a lot of difficulty with that decision to report once I got the notice. I dreaded it. I hated the idea, but it's like, I'll just have to make the best of it I can. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I did, and I don't regret that decision. And another good thing that came out of that was, at the time, the military was offering, or the government offered all the servicemen, if they were honorably discharged, the GI Bill. And as it turned out, I used every penny of it. I remember sitting at the desk in Vietnam in the hotel after hours doing it was chore, I guess you would call it, babysitting the general. One of us had to stay behind after hours in case the general wanted something. So we'd be the gopher to get a report or something. And I remember kind of being there earlier on in my tour and getting angry about being there and thinking about all the people back in the States who didn't care and blah, 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 blah. And I said, I'm going to make them pay. And how I'm going to do this, I'm going to use every penny I can of the GI Bill. And as it turned out, I did. The very last payment of the GI Bill that was sent to the college was right around the time I finished my study to get a master's degree in marriage and family counseling in California. So again, some of these decisions I couldn't have planned, or things I wouldn't have known about in advance, but it's kind of a one step at a time down the path. And my dropping out of engineering school, I think I did the best of it. I made the best of that decision. Yeah. Deciding to enlist in the Army to become an intelligence analyst, I think, was making the best decision of the moment, given my options.
I agree.
Using the GI Bill was another decision. So I think, we can't know. I'm going to turn philosophic if it's okay.
That's fine.
we can't know in advance what's going to be a good decision or a bad decision.
No.
But I think in any given moment, as we learn, we gain more knowledge, we can see possible choices, then we always have an opportunity to course correct. Mm-hmm. There's something called successive approximation. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but it's like I'm not sure where it originated, but it's like in looking toward a goal. Mm-hmm. You head off in a direction and you might say, I'm off target, so I need to adjust a little bit. And so you adjust and you go a ways. You say, well, I'm still off target a little bit, so I'm going to adjust again. And you adjust and you adjust and you adjust till you finally get to your goal, your destination. And so I think that's how we have to, I think that's one way I look at it. To say we, I mean, humans in general operate. That's the only way we can.
Well, I get it. I mean, when I asked my dad, I said, so why did you become a firefighter? He's like, well, I was working at the shipyard. I didn't know what, your mom, they were married already. He's like, your mom was pregnant. And this guy, he's like, hey, you want a job with insurance? And he ended up doing this for another kid later on down the line. He's like, you want a job with insurance? You'll have a regular schedule. You'll work 24 on, 48 off. You'll be able to have another business if you want. You'll have insurance. You'll have a decent set salary. Okay, that all sounds great, doesn't it? Okay, now, while it's not war, one of the things that my dad has said, and he saved somebody from a burning building, and I understand why my dad has had alcohol issues. But one of the things he said is there is nothing worse than the smell of burning flesh. Mm. So I know whether he shared funny stories like a house that had a bunch of roaches in it. And this woman is outside screaming, my baby, my baby, my baby. And he goes in there and the baby's okay. It's ending up, but he grabs what he sees in the crib, throws it in a wraps it up in a blanket and puts it in his coat and runs out. And it's a teddy bear. But the roach house, it was like, he's like, all of a sudden they're in this house, him and this other, one of his teammates, and they're in the house and they're squirting water, and they start feeling things crawling on them. And we're talking cockroaches from New Orleans. So there's these huge roaches just crawling all over them. And they run out of the house and they're just like, we're letting this thing burn, because they just stripped because all these roaches were on them. I mean, so there's funny stories like that, but I'm sure there's some trauma that he has not shared, because how many times do you go into a burning building and you may see something that is going to be life altering? I mean, we don't think about those things. So it's like, while he didn't go into the military, I think in a roundabout way, because he spent 20 something years on the fire department, finally getting to be a driver, an operator. I think at a certain point that affects you. I really do. Yeah.
What you're sharing about the trauma regarding your dad. Well, two things. One, my dad, with his trauma, he didn't share much about himself, his childhood upbringing. He didn't share much about his military experience, except occasionally when he would be around other men who maybe had been in the war, they would swap a little bit of war stories. Or if he was around other men and he wasn't talking about war stories, he was talking about job and job stories. But he didn't share a lot with me. And because he was self-medicating, the way I'm looking at it now in hindsight, the way he was self-medicating with alcohol to deal with his trauma, and he would become rageful and abuse my mother when she confronted him about spending money on going to a beer joint, as they would say, or we would say, instead of spending it on things like paying the electric bill, utilities, or whatever. And so I had I don't know if I'd say healthy, but I was very conscious about not getting in his way. I didn't want to become a battering, a punching bag or something. And so I kind of learned to pull back, and yet I wanted to understand about him. So I was like the ear that when he started talking, I'd hone in on what he was talking about and listen. And so I didn't learn a lot. I didn't have that close of a relationship until later on. We became a little closer as I was an adult, and he, I guess, was out of, I don't know if I'd call it a phase, but I was grown up and out of the house, and I didn't see what was going on between he and my mom. I don't think it was that bad at that point, but he had a weird, wicked sense of humor at times.
But when you think about it, okay, so World War II, because I know somebody else that their dad was a POW,
Mm-hmm.
and he came back, he got married, they had a kid, and the person has said that his dad was very like your dad, didn't say anything about it. It was very just, he wasn't medicating or anything, but he didn't say anything. He kept it bottled up. He made little toy soldiers with his son, but he kept it bottled up. He wasn't going to share anything. And when he got a little older, he released that. But this is where I'm going with this. So with the World War II generation, they came back and they were heroes. They were heroes. They were celebrated, but we were also in a generation of, we do not talk about mental health. We do not talk about anything. You have a drink, you medicate. The wife is good. The wife has a role. The man has the money make, So we had these gender roles. By the time you hit the 60s in Vietnam, 60s, 70s, we have women being more free. We have the anti-war movement. We have people. And I mean, I want to go back to Eisenhower saying, the military industrial complex, we need to be careful of them. And we're still propagating war, but that's off. That's aside. But you had more people that were willing to embrace the feelings. They were embracing drugs to kind of get over the feelings. So they were medicating in a different way. By the time you hit Desert Storm, we now have a terminology called PTSD, and PTSD can affect anybody, not even in the military. Mm-hmm. It's all about trauma, but we're willing to accept trauma. And now that we are 20 years past that, almost 30, we have people that are now willing to say, okay, the regular person is willing to say, okay, I'm not so okay now. Mm-hmm. So we can deal with people dealing with PTSD. We can deal with trauma. We're more open, not everybody, but we're more open with talking about our feelings.
Yeah, we're much more aware of it. Mm-hmm.
So we've had major growth. Now, hopefully we can still continue with that because the pandemic has created a whole nother bunch of mental issues.
Yeah, well, it's traumatic in itself, and a lot of people will have PTSD. I joked at one point regarding writing a book and doing a pitch. I made a joke at the end of it and said, life is a traumatic event. And that was half true and not. It depends on how you define trauma. I think life is a matter of animation, humans, other living animals, struggling with the inanimate world. And everything is a challenge in that sense. Now, most people don't think of it that way, but when you get down to the bottom line of existence and being alive, everything is a challenge. And in some ways, many of the challenges can create trauma. But I think depending on how we define trauma, we may not see it as trauma, but yet I think trauma is more prevalent than we see or that we want to believe. It's prevalent.
There's a couple ways to look at it. It's how are you doing today? Oh, I'm fine. And we put on this mask, and I mean, there's the people, the celebrities that have committed suicide, and people like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Well, I can tell you right now, my mom who did it, her close friends at the time, even her lifelong best friend had no clue. I knew, my grandmother knew she was this way, but she had painted such a picture that she was excited about my wedding. Okay, but she was never going to be there. I knew she wasn't going to be there because she told me she wasn't going to be. That was the last thing she ever said to me was, have a nice wedding. But the thing is, we paint this illusion for the outside world because we have so much going on internally. Then we have all the external factors. It's like, when do you have the energy to actually sit down and go, okay, I'm not okay. I need somebody to help me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As a therapist, which I'd mentioned earlier, the road from high school of becoming an astronaut to post-Vietnam War back into college and studying and becoming a marriage and family therapist. The first full-time job I had after getting my degree was in a adult residential treatment program dealing with drug and alcohol recovery. And one of the things that we talked about in there, the concept is that all of us have a mask that we wear in public. And there are different masks we can wear, and we could over time change our mask to a different mask. Mm-hmm. But most of the time we're not willing to take that mask off and let people see our honest self. And so you can see examples of it all the time when a celebrity or a well-known person will commit suicide. They had their mask, and the mask is to protect us from the outside world, but it also mm-hmm. locks us internally where we can't get out sometimes. We keep it on so tightly, and we're then become isolated and alone. And then if we are having a trauma or struggle with things, then the desperation increases to the point of things like suicide. So I think the way to not only just understanding that we have a mask is to connect with people and to begin to talk honestly about what's really going on for us. And that helps us set the mask aside, at least for a while. And perhaps over time we can remove that mask or not wear it so often and be a more genuine, honest person. And I think healthier as well.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's the point.
This whole little bit reminds me of something I wrote when I was 19 and I was in college. I used to hang out with a group of people back, in the UC, hanging upstairs, just talking with all our friends. And we had all assumed certain roles. And it was funny because I let my friends read this afterwards because I considered myself, my role was the stupid ditz. It wasn't. And everybody's like, no, that's not you. That's such and such. You're not the stupid ditz. But I didn't see myself that way. But anyway, I digress. So the whole thing was talking about how we all, in this group, we all put on a mask of our role. We each had a role to play. But yet when we were alone, one-on-one, we were willing to take that mask down and be who we truly needed to be. Mm-hmm. We were being ourselves. And every one of my friends that read this, because there's about 10 of us, they're like, this is exactly true. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the case. We all put on this at the office, whether it be or at school, we all have these roles that we have been placed in. And I talk about this a lot. We're all given a label. It's like, why do we give each other so many labels? I'm mm-hmm. me. I'm not necessarily the cover you see. I'm not the book cover you see. I'm more of the blurb. But you have to take the time to know somebody. You can't just go, well, you look kind of freaky deaky. I'm not going to deal with you. But the truth is, maybe that freaky deaky personality is there as a mask to hide who I really am.
Right. And it might be not only to protect them from the world, mm-hmm. Because and it might not be they're protecting themselves from the world because they don't want the world to know how bad they are, but it might be they just don't want to feel the vulnerability that they've had in the past when they have been hurt, emotionally traumatized or abused or whatever. They just don't want that to happen again because it was so painful. Right. And so interestingly, you could find some real gems. Or I think a lot of us we carry around these beautiful qualities, but we don't always show them and people don't know about them and they never discover them. I mean, there are things, I think it's impossible for all of us to explain or to show to everyone else all the time. There are things about me that I'm sure my wife doesn't know. I mean, it's like, it wasn't that important, or I didn't think of it, or it never came up in a conversation or whatever. But I'm sure there are little things, significant or not, that she doesn't know about, and vice versa.
Well, for me, I'm on an interesting journey because I'm unpacking some things, going through boxes and stuff, and I'm finding things from my husband that predate me because he's gone now. Mm-hmm. So it's like, and we have no children. So it's like, I'm the keeper of these things. And it's kind of like, so where do these things go now? Mm-hmm. I wasn't part of them. So where do they belong? And it's like, a great example is his high school diploma. Mm-hmm. He doesn't need that anymore.
No.
But then, it comes down to, are you disrespecting the person's life when you start getting rid of all these things? that were accolades, that were rewards? And is it just diminishing their life? Which I don't think it is. But then there's part of me that's just like, and then it comes back to the unpacking of, well, who's going to take care of all your stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Who's going to clean up the messes that you've left behind?
Right. And I've been doing, I cleaned up my mom's mess. I cleaned up my grandmother's mess. Now I'm doing my husband's. And it's just like, okay, so who's going to do you?
Mm-hmm. I hear you. Well, I think what you said hit the nail on the head, that we're not disrespecting the person necessarily to hang, if we don't want or choose to hang on to some physical artifact that they were associated with. But it is good. Where do these things go? After my mother lost my dad, he passed away, and she lived another 10 years and had to move into a senior housing situation, which worked out good for her. But while she was downsizing all the things that they had before she moved in, a lot of it had to go. And she had gotten into a distraction hobby of taking newspaper clippings and making them into like albums of things, like movie stars or this or that or certain top. And she at one point wanted my brother and I to take those and say, well, give them to the library. Well, at that time, the internet was, flourishing, and you could go Google something and learn about it in 2 seconds. And we just had to say to her, Mom, nobody wants that. Nobody is going to use it. I know it probably was disappointing to her to have put all that time in and nobody valuing it from that standpoint. But the honest truth is, 10 years from now, to be honest, who's going to care about your husband's
right? Well, and let's
think about it. And if that's not enough, think about it 100 years from now. And if that isn't enough, 1,000 years from now.
Well, and here's the thing. I know exactly what you're saying, because John's parents died like 6 months apart. Mm-hmm. And they had been together for 60 something years. And you can imagine they moved from house to house to house. And yes, I have some of their stuff too to get rid of. Wow. But, this is the thing. It's like you bring in stuff and then it's like, okay, so now what? And, one of my friends joked, you're going to have to Maria Kondo the hell out of your house, which is true. It's true. But it's a matter of trying to figure out what holds value and what doesn't. What do I want to keep? Yes, I'm keeping some of the cards he gave me. But yeah, the high school diploma, it's like, I don't need to keep this. I really don't. It's not, at a certain point, do I even need my high school diploma? But yes, you do, because, but it's one of those things. It's like, why not just give us a sheet of paper? No, we get this fancy folder and everything else. I'm not going to hang that up. I never did. So
I hear you.
But that's not what we came to talk about. But go ahead if you had something else.
Having said that, I'm not diminishing the emotionality or the sentimentality of keeping things. That's important too. We just, as you said, though, I think we need to make a decision, a really nitty-gritty decision. Do we really want this? Do we really need it? And if not, maybe we need to move it on to somewhere else so it doesn't clutter our lives.
Right.
Anyway.
That's the whole thing. It's like decluttering my life is something that I have to do. And some of it is tied to a childhood trauma, and I'm working through it because after my parents split, my 5th grade teacher decided when I was late for school one day, and that was the only place I could keep any personal things like my Star Wars stuff, to clean out, have the whole class line up from my desk all the way to the trash can and clean out my desk. And I walked in from the doctor's appointment to find this. And that was like the most devastating thing in the world, because this was the only place I got to keep my stuff. So it's like, now I'm trying to work through that trauma, which I know people are like, get over it. But it's something that's still, because at the end of the year, she gave me a trophy, which was half of a jackass that said sloppy. And she's like, I didn't know whether to give you sloppy or messy. It's the same damn thing. She was screwed in the head. She was. And that's the kind of stuff that, that's not a really good teacher. That's a teacher that scars kids. And I got to live with her in 6th grade. So there you go.
compound it.
Yeah. So anyway, that's not what we came to talk about, but that's why I think I have some issues with the clutter, is because I lost a lot of stuff. So it's like you have to get to a point where you got to go, okay, it's time to get rid of it. But you wrote a memoir called Once Upon a Kentucky Farm, Healing from Family Abuse, Alcoholism, and Dysfunction. And it's coming out this year.
It should be, we should launch probably mid-March, give or take a few days or so. And actually the subtitle has been altered a little. It's now Hope and Healing from Family Abuse, Alcoholism, and Dysfunction. And it covers the period of my life as we've touched upon, or as I've touched upon here, from my earliest memories up to basically the time that I left home and was drafted into the Army. Although I do have a little bit of hindsight material in there looking back, and so including the inciting incident, and subsequently, I would add that I wrote a memoir prior to that, so I have two memoirs. Yes, you can have more than one memoir.
So I know,
and which at this point is entitled Another Day in Vietnam, which covers the period of time basically right before I was drafted, going through that decision making, ended up being drafted, going to Vietnam, and then coming back and serving stateside for about a year and a half. And at some point I may have that published, hopefully down the road a little bit. If my first memoir gets anywhere, takes off, then I'll be better prepared to emotionally, psychologically deal with getting the second published.
Understand. I've been working on my third book for 2 years now, but go ahead.
Yeah. And so as you're probably aware of this, most of your listeners may or may not know that to be an author or a published author, you want to be branded. You need to be a business person as a writer. And to do that, it's important to have a website, and it's important to have a social media presence.
And guess what? I branded myself accidentally, because my first book was the Better to Burnout series. And my second book is a Better to Burnout novel, which will be part of the series. And then when I created a podcast, I'm like, well, and I did not do this intentionally. It was kind of like, well, everybody's got a better to moment. And then I was like, after I put the podcast, I'm like, so I guess I'm the better to girl.
There you are.
So I get it.
So after making the decision to take the leap, so to speak, to get this first memoir published, I'm now neck deep in more of the marketing aspect of it, of, what do you do about the keywords and the searches and getting it set up on Amazon, and what about the book cover and podcasts?
And do I go wide, or do I just stay on Amazon? Do I do Kindle Unlimited? Yeah. I've been the gamut.
I tell you, it may be a common experience for others, not just authors or in the book business, but other business people, on how to maximize or optimize your marketing, your branding. On the one hand, it's overwhelming, all of the potential ways you can market and get your message out there. And on the other hand, that's a good thing, because you don't have to do it all. I guess my problem is I try to do more than I try to do too much, and I feel overwhelmed. So I have to kind of check myself and say, well, wait a minute. Do you want to do that? Probably not. And the
issue is, where you used to be able to market yourself and get word of mouth out easily. Now it's like, oh, wait, the algorithm has changed again. Now you need to relearn to how you're going to be able to market on this social media. Oh, but wait, if you pay us, we might let you see it, but we're not really going to let that many people see you. But we're going to act like we are. That way you can pay us.
Right. Or you can hire a consultant, and this consultant knows about this thing. Yeah. That consultant knows about that thing. And never the twain shall meet. Well, they do indirectly, but not. It's like,
And wait, and you're going to make $3 off your book if you're lucky. And guess what? How much did it cost you to make it? Oh, and you're not even considering the time it took you to write.
That's a secret I shall never reveal.
But you know what I'm getting at. It's like you better do it because you enjoy doing it. You want others to read. Otherwise, don't think you're going to be making buku bucks unless you really somehow magically hit it big.
Right. I just saw a presentation, a webinar, or YouTube or whatever recently. The guy was saying that most authors won't sell that much and they won't make a profit. They won't earn a living. And it's just very few. It's like lady luck is fickle. And most people just will never sell that much. And there are so many books on Amazon. I think it's in the more than 5 million, it's probably 7 million titles on there. And I saw another figure that as of 2011, UNESCO, who tracks the figures on this, had determined there were over 129 million titles, separate titles, printed books in the world at that time. That's 10, I hate to say it. That's 12 years ago.
Well, it's the same thing with podcasting. It's like, I think they said there's 2 million podcasts, but there's only like 500,000 that are active. So, none of this is where you're going to make a lot of money. You better do it because you like doing it.
Right.
And not, if it hits it big, awesome. But if you like doing it, you enjoy doing it, then do it, because otherwise it's kind of a thankless job at times. So,
yeah. And that's why I started writing in the first place. And had I known then what I know now, speaking of taking one step at a time along the path, I don't know if I would have written. I don't know if I would have spent so much time and effort into writing them and getting them polished and edited and blah, blah. I might have just said, oh, that was fun at the time. And so, hey, I'll just get on a plane and travel somewhere and have some fun.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think, it always cracks me. My first book I wrote is written as a journal. A bass player's journal by a guy. And it's like, well, it really doesn't need to be edited. I had an opportunity to go have a book signing at Barnes. So I'm like, it doesn't really need to be edited. It's a journal. Do you edit your journal? No, you scratch out things that are,
it's a journal. You don't edit a journal.
Right. Guess what? Well, I have, I think, 95 copies of that book printed that has those mistakes. And I'm often like, do I just drop them off at Goodwill? And my friend's like, no. Once you hit it big, those will be collector's items. You can sell them. And I'm just like, really? She goes, yeah. I'm like, you're insane.
Yeah. That's like all the things I've got in my garage. I might need that someday.
Oh, John and John's dad, the can of screws. Yeah. Okay. And I can, and the infamous, it's broke. Well, I can glue it.
Yep. I can fix it.
Okay, so now I'm going through it. It's like, I think there was something in the kitchen. I was just like, this is never getting fixed. It's done. I'm done. I'm just throwing it away. I don't need this. So, I mean, it's a lot of that, because it's like, sure, we can fix it, but guess what? I'm not going to fix it. It takes time, and I'm not going to fix it. It's done. So, yeah, I get it.
So I'm out there, and I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, and I have my own vanity email address, and people can go to my website, and I don't have a lot published yet. I did have one of the chapters from my first memoir about Vietnam published in it's on my it's available. I don't know how easy it is to get, but the link is on my website to get to it, plus a couple of other things. So I just hope people are going to like what I write. That's the bottom line. I've kind of concluded I'm not going to make tons of money. I may not even make back what I've spent on trying to get this book published, but it'll be out there, and I'll have a little bit of immortality, perhaps. So
are we going to see you on TikTok?
No. Unless you put this on TikTok. No, I don't like.
Here's the thing. I was putting clips of it on TikTok, but I think from now on, I'm just going to go over on TikTok and talk about it, because I got a better response from doing that. So, yeah. Like you were saying before, all the social media have their own unique
quirks about what works, what doesn't work, and it's there is a constant transformational process going on with all of them. And so I just want to limit myself as much as I can, not to get onto some of these newer fangled things like TikTok.
I don't blame you. I mean, I don't totally fit in TikTok, but there's Book Talk, and you're supposed to be selling books on Book Talk. Wow. We'll see. We'll see. I haven't sold any yet. I hit 1,000 followers, and actually over 1,000. But I haven't really sold any books yet. But I got people starting to tune in. So there you go.
Well, good luck with that.
Thank you. So, is there anything that we have not covered that you would like to add?
Gosh. Well, aside from I'd reiterate, look up my website, go to my website, read what I've written, look at my blogs, follow me on Facebook. Please, I beg you.
And all those links, guys, will be in the show notes. So you can go follow Connard because he's begging you. He's pleading with you. He needs those likes. He needs you to interact with him just like I do, but we're not going to go there. Anyway.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, Donna.
No problem. I understand. I told you I was going to be gentle.
Oh yeah, So. You have been, yeah.
So on that note, thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Donna. Take care.
Take care. Maybe I teased a little bit too much because his story was not as bad as you might have feared when we first started this. If it would have been, I would have given you some warnings because I know some people will have PTSD. But Connard's story, it's all about, you think you have this vision of what you want. You think you have this vision of a dream, especially as a young person. We sit there and we're like, okay, this is where I'm going to be. I mean, I'll be honest. When I was in college or high school, I was like, I'm going to be the big time rock star. I'm going to be touring the world, da, 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 da. Well, it never happened. I do write about it, but it never happened in my life. I did follow some bands, but I wasn't the rock star. Did I play bass? Yes. Was I in a band? Yes. Was I a backup singer? Yes. But did I go after the big success? No. Did I pursue it like I could have pursued it? No. Because I found other things to distract me. And that's on me. But so I think a lot of us can relate to having that big dream and then kind of, dare I say, choking. It's like, oh, well, wait, there's a fork in the road. Look, bright, shiny object. Let's go over here. So sometimes I think, somebody once said to me, rejection is your protection. And I think here's the big lesson in that. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be the big time rock star because maybe I wasn't going to be able to handle the lifestyle. And that's okay. I've had a pretty interesting life. And I'm sure, when I look at Connard, he's had an interesting life. I mean, when you think about the zigs and zags his life has taken and where he is, he's done pretty well for himself. So don't get discouraged if life doesn't seem to be moving exactly the way you want it to move. Just keep doing what you got to do. And like he said, if you got to correct the course just a little bit, then do it. That's all you can do. So on that note, I hope you've enjoyed the show. And as always, if you have a question or comment or would like to be a guest on the show, please email me at Donna@better2podcast.com. That's DAUNA@better2podcast.com. If you want to catch up on an episode and you've missed it, that would be at better2podcast.com. All of the episodes are there. And we have our social media links there as well as our Patreon page. So on that note, I'd like to thank Rich for doing the sound audio. You can't hear him, but he tries to make the show sound even better. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, whatever time you're listening to this. And I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye. The Better 2 podcast is mixed, edited, and produced by Rich Zai of Third Ear Audio Productions.